So, good morning, class, and welcome back from long vacation. It's a pity we have to go on vacation for 8 months. So, I'll be taking us on tissue development in Zoo 315, and I'm meant to teach tissue development in Param. Param is just a short form for Pisces, amphibians, reptiles, um, apes, and then mammals. So I try to shorten the notes as much as I could in order not to bore us with uh, much um, write up to read. Okay, I know that we are tired having come back from a long vacation of doing nothing that has to do with academics. Okay, so I'll talk about the tissue interaction in development, and I say that development describes the progressive changes in an individual from its beginning to maturity, that from fertilization of the egg by the sperm to maturity of such an individual or an animal. So, in sexual multicellular organism, development usually begins with a fertilized egg that divide mitotically to produce a many-celled embryo. Of course, in a fertilization, it could either be asexual or sexual type of fertilization, depending on the animal. Okay, so there are key events in animal development. We talk about the gamete formation, the formation of the sperm and egg. Okay, talk about the fertilization, which is egg and this fusion of egg and sperm. Okay, talk about the cleavage, which has to do with mitotic division. And then the gastrulation, which leads to the formation of the germ layers. Of course, there are some animals that are diploblastic, while some are triploblastic. Don't be confused. I know you have been away from lecture for a long time. Diplo means D means two, while triplo, three. Okay, so some have only endoderm and ectoderm, while some have ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So the ones that have three germ layers are called the triploblastic. So we talk about the organogenesis and talk about growth. So having talked about that, talk about stages in early animal development. So in exam, I can ask us to list and explain the four stages in early animal development. So I expect to see fertilization, cleavage, gastrulation, and organogenesis, while you also explain the meaning. So I say fertilization is the process of a single sperm cell combining with a single egg cell to form a zygote. It mustn't be single sperm or single egg, it depends, but just know it's the fusion of the sperm with egg to give rise to an embryo. Talk about the cleavage, which is a rapid multiple rounds of mitotic cell division. It's important to know that in cleavage that the size of the embryo do not change, and that at the end of the cleavage the embryo that is formed is called the blastula. So we talk about the gastrulation, which I told us earlier is the formation or the rearrangement of cells to give rise to the three germ layers or the germ layers, which is the ectoderm, endoderm, and the mesoderm. Talk about the organogenesis, which is the process of organ and tissue formation via cell division and differentiation. I say that gastrulation and organogenesis together contribute to morphogenesis. That's the biological process that results in organ shape and body organization. So, but my main aim or my part of this lecture is to talk about gastrulation, which leads to the formation of the germ layers and then the tissue, etc. So at the end of the cleavage, the typical blastula enters into the gastrulation period, and then the rearrangement of the cells in this blastula give rise to the formation of the germ layers. Gastrulation results in three important outcomes, which can also be two important outcomes when we have only ectoderm and endoderm, but is three if we have ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So we'll talk about the formation of the embryonic gut, which is called the achanteron. The appearance of the major body axis. Okay, let me just be quick so that this video won't be long. So I said generally, once when you, okay, for example, if I ask you in exam, explain the formation of the embryonic gut, I just expect to see the main point, which is how this achanteron is being formed, how the blastula bend inward in a process called invagination, and this inward bending continues until the surface of the bending region extends about 1/3 of the way into the blastocele, forming a new internal cavity called the gut cavity, which we refer to as the achanteron. So it differs the way it happens in diploblastic and in triploblastic animals. So you read it up and see how each of them differs. Okay, study the diagram. Then it's also important to know that the ectoderm give rise to the nervous system and the epidermis. The mesoderm give rise to the muscle cells and the connective tissues in the body, while the endoderm give rise to the columnar cells found in the digestive system and many internal organs. So in exam, if I ask you, write the derivative of the ectoderm, just know that the answer is the nervous system and the epidermis, and the mesoderm give rise to the muscle cells and the connective tissue, and the endoderm give rise to the columnar cells in the digestive system and many internal organs. You list the internal organ. Okay, so talk about the formation of the complete gut. Read it up. Then the formation of a mesoderm, which is the third germ layer. So that mesoderm can form in two ways. So in example, if I ask you, write the formation of the mesoderm. Mesoderm can form in two ways. It's either the cell arises from a ventral area near the lip of the blastopore and proliferates into the space between the achanteron and the outer body wall, or the central region of the achanteron wall pushes outward into the space between the achanteron and the outer body wall. So these are two types in which the mesoderm can be formed. Okay, talk about the formation of the cellum or the column, depending on what you call it. Just know the pronunciation, just know the correct pronunciation, and then the spelling. So I said the blastocele is filled either partially or completely with mesoderm. The coelomic cavity appears inside the mesoderm by one of two methods. It's either by chrysocoli or by enterocoli. So in either of these two methods, each of them is functionally equivalent. Okay, the method by which this coelom form is an inherited character useful for the grouping of the organism. So we talk about tissue in adult animals, which is in mammals, in humans, in mammals. Okay, so the cells in complex multicellular organism are organized into tissue. Of course, you know that tissues are cells that work together on a specific task. The collection of tissues of cells give rise to tissues, while collection of tissues give rise to organ. So the result of the gastrulation, I told us, is the formation of the three germ layers. Now, over the development, these cells will proliferate, migrate, and differentiate into a four primary adult tissue called the epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So in exam, and I can ask us list and explain the four primary adult tissues. So it's epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous, and muscle tissue, while also explaining each of them. So here I gave us the explanation. When I ask this question, I expect to see the key words. That's what we look at while awarding marks. Okay, so I highlighted them in red. You can see the epithelial tissue. This consists of tightly packed sheets of cells that cover surfaces such as the outer side of the body. Our skin is made up of epithelial tissue. They are tightly packed in order to inhibit the penetration of harmful microbes inside the body. So you can also add that the epithelial cells are also polarized, meaning that they have top and bottom side. Give example of these epithelial cells. Then we talk about the connective tissue. When discussing this, I expect you to discuss in detail. So you can tell me that this connective tissue is divided into three types. You have the loose connective tissue, which is most common type of connective tissue found throughout our body. It supports organs and blood vessels. We have the dense or fibrous connective tissue, which is found in tendon, ligaments. We also have the specialized form of connective tissue, which include the adipose tissue. You are also expected to tell me that it consists of cells suspended in an extracellular matrix, and that this matrix is made up of protein fibers like collagen and fibrin. We talk about, of course, you know the function of fibrin, but that's for those that will be doing physiology anyway. So we talk about the muscle tissue. This is an essential for keeping the body upright, allowing it to move, and even pumping blood and pushing food through the digestive tract. So the muscle cells can also be called muscle fibers, and there are three main types of muscle skeletal system. I have the skeletal muscle, have the cardiac muscle, and the smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle will refer to muscle in our everyday life activity, help us carry out our life activity, like walking, standing, etc. So this skeletal muscle is attached to bones by tendon, and it allow us to consciously control your movements. So they are voluntary, while cardiac muscle are involuntary and is found excuse me in the walls of the heart, and that's why a doctor that sees the heart is called a cardiologist. Okay, and they are involuntary because even when we sleep, our heart keeps working, keeps pumping blood, keeps beating. So talk about the smooth muscle, which is also involuntary, that deals with consists of the walls of the blood vessels and the walls of the digestive tract. We'll talk about the nervous system. Thanks to the nervous system, if not, many of us would have been dead by now, because it's the nervous system that sends signal to the brain, informing the brain if we are in danger. For example, if you mistakenly place your hand on a stove or a hot pot, is this nervous system that signals the brain immediately that there is danger, and then you withdraw your hand from there. So this involve in sensing stimuli and processing and transmitting information to the brain. It consists of two types of cell, have the neuron and the ganglia. Then the neurons are the basic information of this nervous system. They generate electric signals called the action potentials that allow the neuron to convey information very rapidly to the brain. Okay, so all our body are connected network, and this allows the neurons to transmit information to the brain. Then you have the structural and functional elements of tissue. So in example, if I ask you to list four or all the uh, elements of tissue, I expect to see the cell, the intracellular substances, the postcellular structures. Of course, cells is meant to be one of the elements of tissue because the collection of cells give rise to tissue. So you have the symblast and you have the syncytium. So know the definition of each of them. So we talk about the extraembryonic tissues in amniotes. Amniotes are the animals that lay egg on the drier environments. That include the birds, the reptiles, and mammals. Of course, you know there are some mammals that lay egg. Have the platypus, the and many. I think there are about 3 mammals that lay eggs. Okay, so um we'll talk about the extraembryonic membrane. In exam, for example, I can ask you what is an extraembryonic membrane. Just tell me that they are membrane present in amniotic eggs that are derived from the embryo, but they are not actually part of the body of the developing embryo. Okay, they are not part of the developing embryo, but they are derived from the embryo. So I can also go far and say list and explain the extraembryonic tissues, and they are the amnion, the chorion, the allantois, and the yolk sac. So the amnion is an inner amniotic membrane which is that surround the embryo itself, enclosing the aqueous environment that the embryo developed. It protects the embryo from mechanical shock and supports hydration from mechanical shock. So it acts as a shock absorber for the egg. So you have the chorion that surround the embryo and the yolk sac. It facilitates the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the embryo and the egg external environment. So, and the rest. This is a structure of an egg, or a picture of an egg showing the extra embryonic tissues. So in exam I can ask us to draw it. So it's okay, you look at it and take cognizance of how the drawings is and be able to draw it offhand. So in closing, I said that most animals do not lay eggs. Most mammals do not lay eggs, although some do, okay? But they still have amniotic tissue that function as part of the placenta and umbilical cord, just like in human. In essence, pregnancy in placental mammals is the result of internalization and incorporation of this amniotic egg into the uterus. So even in the uterus, all these things also work in human, okay? This gastrulation, resulting in direct nourishment of the embryo inside of the amniotic egg rather than delaying it outside of the body with a predefined amount of yolk. So, and with that, we have come to the end of this particular lecture. So I think I still have about one or two topic I will go and check. But if you have any question, you can drop your question in the comment box in my YouTube channel, or you can wait when I come to class, you ask your question. So I wish you guys good luck in your exam, and I hope I will have time to come to the class so we'll discuss. If not, I'll see you in exam hall. Thank you for watching.